Hey kiddos, and welcome back to music class. My name is Mrs. Lizaola, and I cannot wait to share today's music lesson with you. You see, this weekend, I was doing a whole bunch of relaxing, and maybe you were too. It's nice to relax on the weekend and kind of take a break. And I don't know about you all, but when I relax, I like to listen to music. And so I was doing a lot of relaxing and listening to music, listening to some of my favorite music by some of my favorite composers. And I was listening to some music by a really wonderful composer. Remember, a composer is the person who writes the music. Yeah, I was listening to some really wonderful music by one of my favorite composers. His name is George Gershwin. And I love George Gershwin's music because it's kind of magical to me. It's like it's got magic. You see, George Gershwin, he didn't write music like anybody else because he believed in music in a different way than most people. You see, George Gershwin, he always said that music could be found in the heart of any noise at all. He heard music, and so he was inspired by sounds of the city and sounds that you might hear when you go outside, and that's how he wrote his music, and it's beautiful music. And so I brought with me today a book called The Music in George's Head. And it's a wonderful book all about how George hears music everywhere he goes and in the sounds of the city and how he used those sounds to inspire him to write a wonderful piece of music called Rhapsody in Blue. So I'd like to share this book with you today. It's a really good one. This is The Music in George's Head. George Gershwin creates Rhapsody in Blue. Remember, that's that piece of music I told you I was listening to. George heard music all the time, at home, at school, even when he was roller skating down New York's busy streets. Sometimes he was so busy listening to the beautiful music in his head, he didn't pay attention to other things, like getting to school on time. Yikes. Now, George, he wasn't a troublemaker. He just couldn't stop thinking about Melody in F, a classical tune he'd heard at a penny arcade. No one knew George was interested in music until his mother decided the family needed a piano. George's older brother, Ira, took one look at the second-hand instrument and headed to his room. But George ran to the piano. He spun the stool down and lifted the keyboard cover. When he felt those smooth keys beneath his fingers, his face lit up like the lights on Broadway. Without a word, he pounded out a popular ragtime tune. His mother was amazed. She had no idea he'd been practicing on a friend's player piano. Look at his mom and his brother. They're like, oh, can't even believe it. George began studying with some of the best piano teachers in town. At night, he sneaked into concerts to hear famous pianists play. He pasted pictures of his favorite composers, Liszt, Ornstein, and Busoni, into his music scrapbook. When he was 15, George started working at Remick's music store. He played sheet music that customers asked to hear. George also wrote his own tunes, lively, fun, and different. And at 17, he sold his first one. Now, I like this page because it's kind of silly. At first, when you look at this page, you think, oh, that must be George Gershwin right there playing the piano. But it's not. You see, if you look right down at the very bottom underneath the piano, that's George Gershwin. He's spying on some people in concert halls. He's watching them play piano. He's still just a kid there. 3 years later, on a bumpy bus ride, George heard new melodies. Among the clatter and the noise of New York's bustling streets, toes tapping, he plucked out notes for a tune he called Swanee. The loud music annoyed his father, but George kept on playing. He just couldn't quit thinking about those city noises. Millions of people bought recordings of Swanee. Soon, George was invited to every party in town where he played biddly-bop blues tunes all night long. By 1920, everyone knew George Gershwin, the young hit songwriter. He was already so successful. People wondered what kind of music the bold, creative composer would write next, but George already knew. Jazz. As a boy, he roller skated to New York's Harlem neighborhood to hear the smooth, syncopated jazz rhythms in clubs and restaurants. Most serious musicians thought jazz music wasn't music at all. The notes were restless and untamed. The rhythms were wild, unpredictable. Band leader Paul Whiteman loved George's wild, restless music, though. Determined to prove hip musicians like George were playing important music, Whiteman planned a concert, an experiment in modern music. He was sure people would go crazy for this new jazzy razzmatazz. George set out to compose a dazzling, daring piece for the concert, one that shows jazz was exciting, limitless, free. He scratched his head and paced the floors, and scratched and paced some more. He'd barely written a single note when he had to leave town for the opening of his new musical, Sweet Little Devil. The train's steely wheels creaked into motion. Rattly bang. Its huge wheels rolled faster and faster. Rattly bang, rattly bang. Faster still, the heavy wheels seemed to fly over the metal track. Rattly bang, rattly bang, rattly bang. And that's when George heard it. Music. Notes, rhythms, slow and steady. Fast and furious. The train noises created new melodies in George's head. He thought about the old, familiar music he loved. Classical, ragtime, jazz, and the blues. The different styles of music blended together into one beautiful rhapsody. George heard his concerto. He even saw notes on the paper. Back home, George finished his concerto. It was just as he'd planned, daring and razzmatazz, dazzling. It was a musical kaleidoscope of America's melting pot. Rhapsody in Blue. Hey, that's the name of the song. He finally wrote it. With the concert only 1 week away, George and the orchestra started practicing. During rehearsal, a clarinet player decided to play a joke on George. At the beginning of the Rhapsody, his clarinet let out a long, whooping wail. All the musicians laughed, but George didn't. He told the clarinet player to wail like that in the concert. A silent, silvery snow decorated the city for the big day, February 12th, 1924. Hurried feet pounded staccato beats as people rushed inside the Aeolian Hall. Every seat was filled. The lights dimmed. The first of 26 musical numbers began. 26, that's a lot. Backstage, George listened and waited. He was scheduled to perform next to last. So there was 26 songs, and George wasn't even until number 25. I think he was worried that the people might get bored and leave, and it kind of made him nervous. Let's see. As the band blew, plucked, and strummed, the packed hall grew hot and stuffy. Eyelids began to close. Oh, sorry. People squirmed in their seats. Some stood up and they just left. But then George sat down at the piano. Let's see what happens. A clarinet fluttered softly, like butterfly wings on a morning breeze. George smiled at the clarinet player. Do you remember what the clarinet's going to do? The clarinet wailed as it slid up 18 notes. Sleepy eyes flew open. Restless listeners sat still. People heading to the door hurried back to their seats. Trombones and trumpets blew brassy sounds, small and soft, then big and bright. Velvety violins started to sing. More musicians joined in, each carefully playing their sheets of music. Fingers flying, George made those piano keys march, skip, dance. But he didn't have sheet music. George played the notes in his head. Wow, all the music really was in George's head. The room was electrified, energized. People were surprised to hear new melodies mixed with classical, ragtime, jazz, and the blues. George's Rhapsody in Blue was smooth and sultry, brash and bouncy. It turned into an up-tempo march melody. No one had ever heard anything like it, except George. He'd been hearing beautiful music all his life. The end. I love that book, The Music in George's Head, all about how George heard music everywhere he went, and he'd been hearing it his whole life. And then when he finally wrote Rhapsody in Blue, the whole world got to hear it too. Now, I would actually like you guys to get to hear Rhapsody in Blue today. So when we're done here, you're going to click on that picture right in the corner, and it will take you to a really amazing video of Rhapsody in Blue. And it is so cool. It's from a movie called Fantasia 2000. And in that movie, what they did is they listened to music, like George Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue, and then they made a little movie out of it. It's so cool. You are going to love it. But before you head over there to watch and listen to George Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue, we've got to sing goodbye. So you can go ahead and get nice and comfy, stretched out. Ooh, make sure you have lots of room. And you may stand, get ready to snap or push those fingers together and clap and pat and, of course, stomp. Here we go. Goodbye, everybody. Goodbye. Goodbye, everybody. Goodbye. Goodbye, everybody. Goodbye, everybody. Goodbye, everybody. Goodbye. All right, have fun watching Rhapsody in Blue.